Welcome everyone to our Green Chemistry Education webinar. To have you here gathering with us virtually from all over the world. Today's presentation will feature Dr. John Warner, our co-founder, and also a co-founder of the field of green chemistry. My name is Amy Cannon. I'll be your host today. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Beyond Benign, a nonprofit organization dedicated to green chemistry education. The name of this webinar series has been updated to reflect the time that we're currently in. Green chemistry connections is something that I believe all of us are striving for at the moment. In a time where we're all having to distance ourselves, it becomes so much more important that we try to connect as best we can. So today's webinar is also being brought to you in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which is near and dear to my heart. Earth Day back in 1988 was the day that began my path to green chemistry. It was my first time researching a sustainability issue, actually ozone depletion, which was these brilliant scientists down the road from us here at MIT had cutting edge research coming out right at that time. And I created a booth as part of an Earth Day fair at my junior, senior high school. From that day on, I knew I wanted to save the world. I just didn't realize it at the time that my passions for this space would bring me to green chemistry. So I'm so happy today to celebrate Earth Day with you and talk about this topic that's addressing and solving sustainability issues and all these sustainability issues that I began studying and learning about all those years ago, but addressing these issues at the molecular level. So with that, happy Earth Day. We're thrilled to have so many folks from different countries, different backgrounds joining us today. At Beyond Benign, we work across the continuum from K through 12 to higher ed and industry as we prepare and support scientists and citizens to address sustainability through green chemistry. We see education as central to achieving a sustainable society. And we need to work together to properly train and prepare students, educators, and professionals to face today's challenges and tackle sustainability issues. I know we have K through 12 teachers, college university faculty, students, along with industrial scientists and leaders joining us today. We all have essential roles to play as we build a sustainable future together. This webinar is being brought to you by Beyond Benign, where our mission is to foster a green chemistry education community that empowers educators to transform chemistry education from cradle to career for a sustainable future. And building this community is now more important than ever. So thank you for being a part of this today, and we hope you stay engaged and involved. So please do sign up for our newsletter, which you can see on our homepage, on the bottom right of our homepage, to be notified about any upcoming webinars and opportunities in K through 12, college, university, and professional education. And if you like what you hear today and would like to contribute, then please do so by using the donate link on our homepage. I also wanted to take a brief moment to, before we begin today, to thank so many of our sponsors and partners. These companies, foundations, and organizations have been essential in advancing green chemistry education, and we really can't thank them enough for their continued support. So reviewing some logistics briefly before we get started, we are broadcasting live from our homes and recording this session. So all attendees are in listen-only mode and all lines are muted. If you have a question, please type it right into your question chat box on the control panel for our moderators to view. We have a fabulous set of moderators today, our two program managers, Natalie O'Neill, our higher education program manager, and Janie Butler, our K through 12 program manager. After John's presentation, we'll respond to as many questions as we can. And the recording will also be posted in the link that you can see here, and we'll also make sure we put it in the chat box there too. And any supporting documents, and you will actually receive a link to the recording in your email inbox tomorrow as well. For those of you who participate in social media, please connect with us through Twitter or Facebook. We'd love to hear some live tweeting going on. If you're joining us as part of a virtual class or event, let us know in the chat box or on social media. And also let us know where you're joining us from across the globe. I know there's lots of people joining us from many different countries. In fact, we have our fabulous Juliana Vidal here joining us all the way from Brazil to help with the conversation on social media during this webinar. So please reach out to her throughout the discussion today. And thank you for joining this webinar and being part of this community. So now, finally on to the main event. So we're thrilled to have John speaking with us today on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And I'm gonna introduce John and then we'll hand the controls right over to John. So Dr. John Warner, he's one of the founders, the co-founders of the field of green chemistry, writing the defining book, Green Chemistry Theory and Practice, and also the 12 Principles of Green Chemistry with Paul Anastas over 20 years ago now. He's a co-founder and director of innovation and industrial training here at Beyond Benign. He's a co-founder and president of the Warner Babcock Institute. He's a distinguished professor of chemistry at Monash University in Australia. He's received so many honors and awards throughout his career. Most notably, as an industrial chemist, he received the Perkin Medal, the highest award in industrial chemistry. As a professor, he was honored in the Oval Office with the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science Mentoring, for bringing women and underrepresented minorities into the chemical enterprises. As an inventor, he has nearly 300 patents. He's worked with over 100 multinational companies. 15 of his inventions have been assigned or licensed to various companies. His inventions have served as a foundation for new companies in asphalt paving, hair color restoration, photovoltaics, and ALS drug therapies. He's been named a Lemelson Invention Ambassador. He's also done extensive work with government agencies, supporting and advising agencies in Massachusetts, California, the US federal government, the European Union, and the state of Victoria in Australia. He's received the Reinventing Government citation from Vice President Gore, helping create the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge, which still remains today. The German Ministry of Economic Affairs and TU Berlin recently created the John Warner Center for Green Chemistry Startups in Berlin. He's received the American Institute of Chemists Northeast Division Distinguished Chemist of the Year, and he's a fellow of the American Chemical Society, the Royal Society of Chemistry, and the Royal Australian Chemistry Institute. Utne Reader called him one of the 25 visionaries changing the world. And ICIS named him one of the most influential people impacting the global chemistry enterprises, and that he is. So with that, I am happy to hand the controls over to John, and take it away, John.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Beyond Benign, for organizing this webinar, and thank everybody for coming and joining today on Earth Day for our 50th anniversary celebration. I hope that everybody is safe and healthy and happy, and your family is managing and weathering our COVID-19 realities of today as best as we can. And hopefully, as we share some time together, this a little bit of a silver lining that we have opportunities now to be more with our families and to be able to gather together like things like this. So thank you. I want to start my presentation by just beginning with a disclaimer that I don't claim to have any gifted insight. I don't claim to have all the answers to any questions or anything like that. I'm not so presumptuous to think that I have any better view of the universe than anybody else does. So if I come off sounding presumptuous at any point, that is an accidental affectation of how I'm talking, because the way that I look at it is I've lived my life just like everybody else has. I've been a professional chemist for about 35 years. The first decade of my professional life, I was an industrial chemist working at the Polaroid Corporation. And then subsequently, I've been on Dow's Sustainability External Advisory Council, and I work with CEFIC in the European Union for the Green Chemistry boot camps. The second decade of my life, I was an academic, industrial life, professional life, full professor of chemistry, full professor of plastics engineering, director of biochemistry. We created the world's first PhD program in green chemistry at the University of Massachusetts. Subsequently, I've been working with Beyond Benign in these other universities. As an entrepreneur, I founded the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry with Jim Babcock, and then we've subsequently had other spin-outs from our technologies, hair print, collaborative medicinal development, collaborative aggregates, and ambient photonics. And then throughout these 35 years, I've had the opportunity to interact with different government agencies as with the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award in the US here, but also with Massachusetts, California, testifying to Congress a couple times, and then the strategic advisor at the EPA in Victoria. So the way I look at this is that through my life, I've had the opportunity to see how we do chemistry, how we teach chemistry, how we invent chemistry, and how we manage chemistry. And for me, if we're truly going to have a sustainable future, we're going to have to make changes in all the aspects of the chemical enterprises, not just in one. And this is about how we can work together. Yes, the professional chemists are central to this because we're the ones that are inventing the new technologies, but we can't do it alone. We need to have help. We need to have collaborations. And so I thought what would be useful for today's presentation is to give some thoughts about the duality of chemistry being the central science, so to speak, of all this, but then the reality that we chemists can't do it alone, and how to think through these thoughts. Okay, so chemistry, as we know, has done some really amazing things for our society. We've got a lot to be proud of. When we think of the agricultural progress that's been made over the years, I found this graph that shows an 82% increase in global food production since 1990. The way that this has been accomplished is through the invention of chemical things like pesticides, and it should not be ironic to anybody that as we've got an 82% increase in global food production, we've got the 78% increase in the pesticide usage across the world. And so we can see this. And so there's a lot to celebrate as far as, increasing the distribution of food to the world's hungry. But of course, there's the negative aspects too. We open up the newspaper, turn on the radio, look on the internet, and we hear about these reports about pesticides in our food supply, the hazards of these things and the toxics of these things. And there's the good and there's the bad. When it comes to electronics, again, we've done some amazing things in electronics. If you look just in the microelectronics industry, there's this thing called Moore's Law that is talking about the production of the number of transistors on integrated circuits. And since 1970, you can see this amazing increase in the science and the development of miniaturization and the faster and faster speeds. I'm sure everyone on this webinar has heard the line that our cell phones have more computational power today than the Apollo space mission. So there's amazing things that we can celebrate. But of course, there's the negatives, the e-waste problems that we're being inundated with. When it comes to energy, there's many advances in energy. I just decided to illustrate in photovoltaics. You can see that in the worlds of photovoltaics and solar research, the efficiency of devices is going through the roof. The developments are amazing. But of course, from the other aspects of energy, we all know about IPCC and the climate change and the predictions of CO2 and global warming. You open up the newspaper, you turn on the radio, you look on the internet, there's the good and there's the bad. When we talk about pharmaceuticals, check this out here. This website, the SEER Cancer Statistics Review, shows that since 1975, the survivability, once diagnosed with cancer, has increased over 50% for the 10-year survivability. This is amazing stuff that's happening in the pharmaceutical sciences. But of course, you open up the newspaper, turn on the radio, look on the internet, and we hear about pharmaceuticals in the environment and the hazards and the problems with this getting into our waterways and our lands. With materials, it's kind of interesting when you think of right now it's a very hot topic about, plastics in the environment and materials and everything. We've got to remember that there is a massive amount of the global population that is in an economically distressed scenario where the offering of lightweight, inexpensive plastics has actually been a game changer for survivability. And it's an interesting and somewhat poignant reality that in 1990, the global production of plastics actually began to outpace the global production of steel. And so while there is a lot to be proud of and to celebrate, you open up the newspaper, turn on the radio, look on the internet, and we hear about plastics in the ocean and in the environment and things like that. So it's interesting that the chemical sciences, when we think about the impacts and the service in society, we in science, when we think about matter, we wrestle with this concept of the duality of matter, that matter has a wave aspect to it and a particle aspect to it. And it's interesting to recognize that when it comes to chemistry and service to society, there's a duality. There are some positive attributes that are happening, and there's some negative attributes that are happening. And if we're going to have a sustainable future, that somehow we need to rationalize this dichotomy. So we're blessed to have so many wonderful movements, so many wonderful philosophies, so many wonderful programs, cradle to cradle, resilience, natural capitalism, the circular economy, responsible care, limits to growth, biomimicry, the UN SDGs, the European Green Deal, and Alliance to End Plastic Waste and green chemistries. There's so many approaches. We look at all these and we say, how do I fit in? What is my role to play? And the most important thing that I think we need to recognize is that the truest, and when you look at all approaches to sustainability, when you look at all of the problems that have happened in the past, one of the things that seems to me to be a recurring theme is the absence of a respect of diversity always leads to trouble. And what we need to do is not be in competition, not be looking at one being a successor to another and one movement being better than another, and recognize that they all have important roles to play, and every individual in society is going to match up to some other than the other because their particular skills will be in sync to this. And so what we need to really do is map out how this stuff all fits together. Okay, and I love this quote from personal hero is Mahatma Gandhi. The difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problems. And this is something that we need to recognize, is that we're capable of doing a lot of things, either socially or through technology. We need to unlock this human potential and find out, and that's only going to happen through collaborations and cooperations with one another. So again, remember my disclaimer, I don't claim to have any gifted insight. I am not a specific definitions word person. So please, as I use different words, don't get hung up on what specific semantics I'm using. Hopefully we focus on the concepts here that I'm presenting. And this is a work in progress. And so I'll probably evolve the way that I phrase these things. But I've tried to kind of put together, what is this whole process? We start with natural resources, and we extract from natural resources, and we make molecules and ingredients. Then we take these molecules and ingredients, and we use the tools of synthesis to make materials and components. And then we manufacture products using those materials and components. And then we hope that the highest form that we can have of sustainability is to maintain a system in which these products stay in use or in reuse. And then when that fails, we have to go back to the materials and components using what people refer to sometimes as mechanical recycling. And when that has problems, we go back to molecules, ingredients, with a term that I use, molecular reprocessing. And then at the end of the day, we have to go all the way back to the natural resources and look at degradation and biodegradation pathways. What's interesting is if you look at this process, each one of these verticals have different skill sets and different types of needs required for us to really push to a sustainable world. Okay, and so in the manufacturing and recycling, you can think of this as trying to maintain a closed loop. When we think of synthesis and molecular reprocessing, I refer to this as materials metabolism, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. And then when we get down to the end here, we're looking at regeneration. How can we have these extractive processes actually ultimately have some regenerative ability within it? So if we look at this whole thing from beginning to end, you say, okay, how does this all fit together? Well, in my way, and obviously nothing is cut and dried and there's overlaps all over the place. But in one way, the circular economy addresses on the product side of this equation. And green chemistry kind of addresses the molecular invention part of these things. Now, obviously, like I said, there are aspects of green chemistry in use and reuse, and aspects of circular economy and natural resources. So of course, this isn't these perfectly well-defined boxes, but it's a useful way of kind of parsing out how this fits together. So let's go into each of these verticals a little bit more. I think it's useful to focus into each of the verticals. The first one is use and reuse. And Janine Benyus is another one of my personal heroes and the author of biomimicry and the founder of the field of biomimicry. And man, does she have it right when she says that 3.8 billion years of evolution and life on Earth, nature has figured things out. And we humans have an opportunity to do this. So if we look at each of these verticals, and we look at these verticals through the lens of the natural world, some things that we can think about. So when we think of use and reuse, for example, a hermit crab. A hermit crab, as it grows, it leaves the little shell and it goes and finds a bigger shell. That shell is being reused, and it goes from hermit crab to hermit crab. We humans, what we try to do is we try to make car parts and things that last for a very long time, stay in commerce as long as possible. Obviously, something like a playground, we don't want that changing every day or every week. We want this to be durable goods. We want this to last for a long time. If we make something to be reusable, something that now that's kind of like the hermit crab's shell. One way to think of this, one way that I propose for us to think of this is to differentiate the design product aspect of something and the molecular composition of something. So when we use and reuse something, we conserve the molecular composition and we conserve the form. So both the composition and the form are maintained. And we do this as much as we can because that keeps us at the highest state. But what ends up happening is entropy ultimately rears its ugly head and says, no, I'm not going to let you do that anymore. And things break. And that's just the reality that we're stuck with. And so what happens when things start to break? Well, we shift to the next vertical of the closed loop concept, in which in nature, one way of looking at this is a bird will go get twigs and rocks and things like that and build a nest. A beaver will go find pieces of things in the forest and maybe cut down a tree to make a dam. We humans, when we try to reuse materials in different ways, what we'll do, like with plastics, what we'll do with mechanical recycling of plastics, we'll collect them, we'll sort them, we'll shred them, we'll melt them, we'll granulate them so that we can keep plastics being recycled and recycled and recycled. When we do this vertical, what we're doing is we're conserving the molecular composition, but we're changing the form. The twigs on the ground are now a nest in the tree. The bushes and the things on the ground are now a dam in the river. The plastics have been cut and shredded, so whatever they looked like before, they might have looked like a cup, they might have looked like something else, but they've been shredded and have turned into a different form. But the composition, the intent, is to maintain that composition. And of course, that happens until it doesn't. Entropy rears its ugly head. And if you look at the molecular structure, if we look at polymers, every time we do mechanical recycling, there's a statistical chance that these materials start to break down. And the molecular weight of the polymers start to get smaller and the mechanical properties start to degrade. So what happens? We have to shift to the next vertical. And that next vertical is what I refer to as materials metabolism. And when we talk about materials metabolism, we're talking about large molecules being interconverted to small molecules and small molecules being converted to large molecules. We have catabolism and anabolism, and nature has evolved a spectacular way to do this in a dynamic equilibrium, right? And so I use as an illustrative example, here's Amy, my wife, and my daughter Natalie. It's an older picture of her. What happens when we eat food? In nature, how does biology organize itself so that when we eat food, what do? Well, interestingly enough, if we were designed by humans, if the biological system was designed by humans, what would we do? We would break down the protein, separate the amino acids, purify them, have a little truck, maybe store glycine in one finger and alanine in another. We'd take the carbohydrates, we'd put glucose over here and ribose over here, maybe store some lipids here. But that's not what nature really does, right? What nature does is that simultaneously, as we break down molecules, we form new ones. As we're eating, we're growing hair, we're growing fingernails, we're growing blood cells. Nature has figured out how to do these things at the same time. This is the materials metabolism of nature. But in this time here, now what we're doing is in these processes, the molecular composition is being altered and the form is being altered at the same time. So both form and composition are being altered. And of course, what makes nature do things so much better than we humans is that not only does nature couple the molecules, nature couples the energy. That all of a sudden energy is also part of this thing, that the amazing invention of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that most metabolic transformations occur with these phosphate groups being energetically moved back and forth, the electron repulsion of these oxygens. There's a potential energy that we push energy up a hill, we push energy down a hill, we make molecules, we break molecules. Nature has figured out a way to couple these things. And we need to learn so much from nature. And then the last vertical, after we've done that, is we've got to look at, okay, well, what happens at the end of this? If it's going to go back to nature, how is it going to go back to nature? And this regenerative cycle, again, anyone who's inspired by nature, you can't help but be in awe of, termites making termite mounds and dung beetles doing the things that they do, and bees, getting pollen, and, wildlife eating their prey. This is an amazing circle of life kind of thing where nature has certainly figured this out. And as we get further away down to the left in this diagram, we find that we become more and more and more unnatural. And so we look at the ways that we do our extractive technologies, and our extractive technologies on the right here don't look a whole lot like the things on the left. And so what's going on? Well, in this case here, it's useful to see that we're altering composition and we're conserving the form. It's kind of, it seems a contradiction, but when you really get down to it, you see what I mean. It's the composition is being changed while the form is being set. But this isn't the end of the story. If we look at this map and we say, okay, where does everything fit in on this map? I would argue that if we spent a great deal of time mapping everything out, we would look at this and be very satisfied. Well, this looks pretty sustainable. Yeah, we got some problems, but what's on this picture here looks really good. Well, the problem is not everything is on this picture yet, because what happens is when we extract, we have leakage. When we synthesize, we have leakage. When we manufacture, we have leakage. When we use this leakage, we have leakage. This thing is leaking like a sieve. These things here are not in the loop. These are things that are falling out of the loop. And we as humans, yes, we can describe a system the way we hope and want it to be, but there's always going to be the inevitability of things not going the way we would like them to go. And in those cases, we've got to ask ourselves, how do we address these? So essentially, when we look at this, Going to the right, I would argue, is leaning more toward behavioral modifications, product design, adopting behavioral changes. As we go to the left, we're talking about technology innovations that are compatible with nature. And clearly this is not cut and dried and there's overlap in both directions. This isn't, an absolute here. But the point is that we are not going to get to where we want to go just by doing behavioral changes in society. We need technology that's going to help us. And we're not going to get there with just technology. We need behavioral changes that help facilitate the technologies and steer and direct what technologies need to be created. So at the end of the day, there's got to be some way to put this behavioral stuff and this technology stuff together. And so what's interesting from my perspective, if we map out these things, conserve form, composition, alter form, alter composition, alter form and alter composition, conserve and alter there, the vertical here, the materials metabolism vertical, we're altering both the form and the composition. So from a design specific, we've got the most degrees of freedom and the most design opportunities in this space. And so it's absolutely critical that we address these issues and find ways to use the tools of chemistry along with all the other things. And of course, I have a bias here. This is kind of what green chemistry is all about, and the 12 principles of green chemistry, and the acknowledgement that for us to truly have sustainable innovations in green chemistry, we need to have things that are more environmentally benign than alternatives, but we also have to go beyond benign, and we have to look at how things perform and what things cost. And only if we have safety, performance, and cost do we have what I feel is successful, sustainable green chemistry. And this can only happen through massive collaborations with a great group of people. Okay, so let's look at this in a little bit more focused area. So imagine there's a field somewhere. We humans get together and we decide we're going to make a pond. We dig a hole, we fill it up with water, we put in some fish, we put in an animal and a couple trees. We come back a little bit later and everything's dead. We just aren't smart enough to figure out the thing. Again, the 3.8 billion years of in the millennia of trial and error of nature, of creating these delicate balances and dynamic equilibria of materials and energy, something that we're struggling to do. But it's not impossible. Over the last few decades, we're starting to figure it out. Here is a pond. Okay, here's Amy and Natalie at a pond. Amy's a little bit older in this picture. This pond works because it wasn't designed by us, us humans. It evolved through the millennia. And so the birds and the bees and the bugs and the bunnies are all figured it out how for this dynamic equilibrium to successfully, coexist. We have started to scratch at the surface of this. Here is the metabolic pathways that have been mapped out in the organic cells. And you can see the complexity here. And one can look and say, oh my God, this is so much to understand. We've really only scratched at the surface. But we've demonstrated that we can do this, that we can understand how dynamic equilibria in nature can be supported and sustained. So here we are now, 2020. There's a factory in China, there's a factory in Asia, there's a factory in Europe, there's a factory in South America, there's a factory in North America. We've got the electronics industry, we've got the pharmaceutical industry, the cosmetics industry, textiles industry, and here we are in 2020 trying to find a way to weave them all together, to have some kind of a balance, to have some kind of a circularity here so that we can share resources and share waste and do things. But man, is it hard. And the reason that it's hard is that these things, unlike nature that coexists together, these things were designed completely in isolation of each other. They were not aware of each other. As the pharmaceutical industry did what it did, and the electronics industry did what it did, this factory was built. There was no at the design stage trying to understand how things fit together. And so now here we are scratching our heads saying, how can we do this? And although it's difficult, it's not impossible, because there's one thing that connects all of the things on this slide: chemistry. And if we can work together, chemists and non-chemists, to find aspects of each of these different things and find how can we make them fit together, we can pull this off. So if we look at this loop here and we look at the circularity of this system of natural resources, manufacturing, distribution, use, and collection, this is a loop. Problem with a closed loop is it presupposes that everything we want is in that loop. And I think we need a few more inventions here. So where would invention fit on a closed loop? So me being the twisted person I am, I see a little twist in this diagram, and essentially I put in a Mobius strip here, and I say, okay, so we have the materials ecology where the materials go, but we have to superimpose on this what I call the intellectual ecology, the basic research, applied research, development, scale up, commercialization, and these have to work together in intimate relationship with each other. We need to be learning from the people on the front line of making products and the people that are inventing and creating behavioral changes and all that. And so the materials ecology and the intellectual ecology, it's not like we need a Venn diagram. It's not like a spoken wheel. I love the Mobius strip because the Mobius strip is intimately related to each other at all points. And so it's useful to think of it from this perspective. And so again, my disclaimer of my presumption here, I don't claim to have the answers, but here are some observations I've made about looking at what I call materials metabolism and nature's mechanisms that we can learn from. Okay, but if you think about it, we humans, oh my goodness, we have such a non-sustainable way of looking at chemistry and materials. Listen to our language. We break bonds, we make bonds, we force things to do what we want them to do. It's almost as if you can imagine as my iPhone comes off of the assembly line, you can hear the molecules screaming, no, they want to go back to where they were before we forced them to do what we want them to do. Well, Lynn Margulis, amazing biologist, wrote this book, Symbiotic Planet. And I love her philosophy that evolution isn't about the survival of the most dominant prey, the fittest, or that. It's the survival of the most compatible. And I think we need to take this kind of cue from our materials design. I do this jokingly by saying, we need to put our molecules on a couch and say, what do you want to be? And if the molecule looks up at us and says, I want to be a paint, well, it's going to be a heck of a paint, right? If it wants to be a paint, it's not going to fade, it's not going to chip. If we force the molecules to do what we want, those molecules are going to fight us back. But what I mean by this is if we, instead of forcing the molecules, we play the role of the discoverer. We look at the molecular topography, the electron density, the lipophilicity, and we try to figure out how to make these things work. That's where it's at. Put the ego aside a little bit. Try to be a little bit more learning from nature. And so I've come up with these 5 mechanisms of nature that I want to quickly go through. Okay, the first mechanism that I've noticed is triggered change. Okay, think about this for a second. We eat our breakfast, we eat our lunch, we eat our dinner. And the enzymes and the chemistry inside of our stomach digests it. Do you ever think a hamburger looks kind of like us? Why does our stomach digest the hamburger and not digest itself? Well, the way that this works is that we have triggered chemistry. The enzyme pepsinogens, a zymogen, that essentially gets clipped and a blocking group gets removed from it and the active form happens. And so in nature, a triggered event happens to control before and after. Think about neurotransmission. I scream at you, you get scared, you jump. Okay, what happens when that happens is you've got neurotransmission in which coming on the forward side of a neurojunction, you've got the signal coming down, you've got neurotransmitters passing through the junction, binding to the receptors to induce the change that goes down and propagates through your neuron. Well, how do we ever calm down? If this is flooding the gap, we're going to stay screaming and yelling and with our arms up over our head all the time. So the way nature has triggered the cessation of this impulse is that the acetylcholine, which is the neurotransmitter, is broken down by acetylcholinesterase into 2 parts that are now inactive. And that inactivity stops that from happening. Nature changes things by triggering. Okay, and so we think of, okay, an analog response. We turn up the volume on a radio, it gets louder. This isn't a very natural way of things happening. Think about a solid. Ice isn't 20% melted at one temperature and 50% melted at another. No, it's a solid, it's a solid, it's a solid. Then it melts, and then it goes on further again. If we use this kind of transition, and we use this lens in looking at our products, when we look at these triggered events, we're talking about one state, stability, performance, in another state, product stability. We need to do this for biodegradation in the environment, okay? Here I have my milk carton. We want to make a biodegradable milk carton. The problem is that what we don't want is when our milk carton's in the refrigerator, we don't want it breaking down and leaking. Then we want it to break down when we want it to break down. So maybe it is, we need triggered degradation. We don't need an analog response. We need a triggered response. A very quick example of using this technology, one of the commercializations we did at Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry, is Collaborative Aggregates is the spin-out company that is commercializing asphalt pavement technology. All the roads in the United States and in the world, the sun and the air oxidize the surface, rendering it all nasty, so we have to repave it. Well, that repaving, a lot of that old stuff gets accumulated in landfills. We don't have an opportunity to reuse them. So what this technology allows us to do is to use high levels of recycled content, circular economy, lower processing temperature, carbon and climate, it's non-toxic, environmentally safe, green chemistry, and it's self-healing and repairing biomimicry. And so there's two products. There's the Delta S, which goes into the pavement, and Delta Mist, which gets sprayed on it. And so this is an example of triggered chemistry. Collaborations is another very interesting mechanism in the materials metabolism. A lot of organizations will do a skills assessment. You go and you take a test, and some people say, oh, I'm good at math, and I'm good at communication. An unwise organization will take these poor people and say, oh, you that's not good at communicating, go take a workshop. Become better at it. You're not good at math, go take a workshop. Everyone goes to doing stuff, and everyone's unhappy and sad because they do math because they love math. They don't communicate because they don't want to communicate. A smart organization doesn't force people to improve deficiencies. They recognize that people should do more of what they love. If they're doing what they love, they're going to do better at it. And so they collaborate, and then everybody's happy. They're doing what they want, and they're helping each other out through collaboration. We chemists have never really figured that out. We make these island of Dr. Moreau molecules where we put all this functionality on a molecule when all we simply wanted was the simple molecule. What happens when we do some chemical derivatization, a covalent derivatization of a molecule? What we do is we're really mitigating the intermolecular forces between the molecules and the environment. And nature doesn't do it this way. Nature makes collaborations. A membrane has all kinds of different components to it, the lipids, the proteins, the carbohydrates. If we can learn from that, instead of changing the molecules, form collaborations, this is what I call non-covalent derivatization, gives us an opportunity to be more natural. Look at tree material and cellulosic material. Cellulosic material, they're amazing collaborations. You've got the cellulose fibers, the hemicellulose components, and the lignin all collaborating together to make these structures. My example that's successful out of the Warner Babcock Institute is the spin-out company Collaborative Medicinal Development that's taken this material that's not very bioavailable, using non-covalent derivatization and other mechanisms, increase the bioavailability. We've got 3 phase clinical trials on clinicaltrials.gov for motor neuron disease, ALS, and Parkinson's disease. And we've only been able to do this using this kind of philosophy. The third one is alignments. Lavoisier started chemistry back in the 1700s, so we've been at this for a long time, 250 or so years. We humans have designed systems to heat things under high temperature, apply high pressure, and use all these harsh solvents. If we look out at nature, biological design outperforms what we do, but also outperforms how we do it. In nature, everything's at room temperature, ambient pressure, using water as a solvent, and biological systems. Why? Well, a thermometer is a molecular speedometer. If you think about it, as we heat something up, molecules move faster. As we cool something down, molecules move slower. The way this works, when we learn chemistry, we learn that the geometries of electron density around molecules are important to understand because only specific trajectories form the reactions that we want to have happen. And so molecules will 99.999% of the time bump into each other and not produce chemistry. However, every once in a while, the right trajectory happens. When we heat things up, put things under high pressure, solvate things in solvents, all we're doing is increasing the collisions, all collisions, the good ones and the bad ones. The epiphany that I had is that there's almost never a reactive collision in nature. Almost never in nature do two molecules bang into each other and violently react. What happens in nature are they first use the same orbitals, the same regions of electron density that control reactivity, also control orientation. And so they snuggle up to each other, then they react. That's an opportunity we need to think about. The spin-out company for Warner Babcock, Ambient Photonics, employs in part this technology by making a self-assembled system, much like an Escher drawing, where the semiconductor, the chromophore, and the electrolyte have this continuity that facilitates electron transfer. This is really exciting technology that is not for outdoor use, for indoor low-light use to power devices that are the Internet of Things kind of thing. This is a very exciting technology. Synchronicity is my next mechanism. Again, go back to this concept of large molecules and small molecules. One thing we do when we learn chemistry, unfortunately, we think of chemistry as a series of soliloquies. You know, this molecule reacts to this molecule to form this and this. It's almost as if it was a Shakespearean play, would have some players come on the stage, they would leave, and the next players, so the starting material come, they disappear in the product form. That's not really the way to think about it. Well, the way we got to really think about it, imagine you're sitting in your chair and I'm going to play Richard III for you. Okay, you're watching a play of Richard III. But just for the heck of it, I'm also going to put Hamlet and Macbeth and King Lear and Romeo and Juliet. You're sitting there, your head is exploding. You're trying to watch 5 plays at the same time. Oh my God, I can't do this. I can't watch this. It's also the cacophony of activity is almost impossible to watch. In a cell, it's not 5 reactions, it's not 50 reactions, not 500 reactions. Thousands of reactions happen at the same time in nature. How did nature figure out to do things synchronously? Well, here's a way of thinking of it. All right, just a way of looking. Here's another picture of Natalie when she was younger. You can see these toys that she's got in her hands. Everyone's familiar with these type of toys. You know, you can make different objects and different things with these things. It's kind of interesting to say that once you introduce a new shape, a new thing, it's a game changer as far as how we're trying to do things. But what's really interesting is these blocks are reversible, right? After Natalie has played all day, Amy and I, we can disassemble it, put it in the box, and when she wakes up in the morning, start all over again. Really kind of beautiful model. Of course, these aren't reversible. But the problem is we use our hands to put this thing together. We want to make this thing, so we make it. But chemistry doesn't work that way. We can't see chemistry. We can't touch chemistry. We can't force chemistry to do what we want it to do. It's almost like, imagine taking these pieces, putting these pieces in a box, shaking the box up, and hoping that that comes out. Of course, we're going to have all kinds of different things going on. We can't control that. Nature does. So let's think of it this way. What's happening here is these snaps, they will bump into each other, they will stick together, right? What if we put Velcro in? Velcro would stick together, but what's interesting is Velcro doesn't compete with the snap. It's synchronous, but the technology is non-competitive. And a button can go at the same time and not compete. We can now imagine making devices, making things. If we had this orthogonal, non-competitive chemistry, we can start imagining doing some pretty crazy things. And this isn't as insane as you might think. Look at my daughter's cheek there. What do you want to do with it? You want to pinch that cheek. Why does the cheek deform and go back to normal? The protein elastin. Elastin deforms and repairs. It's a beautiful protein. I'd love to talk to you more about it, but I want to get through this presentation. Let's use our molecular microscope, so to speak, and hone in on this molecule. The amino acids in these proteins are kind of like these blocks. You know, the carbon-carbon nitrogen is stuck together. The peptide linkages, the condensation things, where the nitrogen and the carbons condensed in the loss of water, well, that's kind of like these snaps. The hydrogen bonding between some of these things, well, that's kind of like the Velcro. And the covalent cross-linking desmosine units, well, that's kind of like the button. Nature has figured this out. The technology that has been spun out called hairprint is based on this kind of synchronicity, where an insect, when it tries to grow, it sheds its exoskeleton, it turns dark and black in a couple hours. It's a tyrosinase oxidative cascade. What we realized, we didn't grind up dead bugs to do this. We found that velvet bean has the similar process. So we take an extract from velvet beans and we're able to color hair. It restores the original color hair. If you have color hair like mine and you get back to the color hair you had 30 years ago. Someone with black hair, black. Someone with light brown, it gets brown. Just like our finger has a fingerprint, our hair has a hairprint. This product has been commercialized for the last 4 years. It's an example of synchronicity. How do you have the chemistry happen, it penetrate, it stay in? This is an example for that. The last example is diversity. And I make the statement, if the chemical enterprises embraced diversity 50 years ago and welcomed different perspectives, I don't know that we'd be here worrying about so many things now. Someone would have said, you're doing what? But because we have this isolationist approach, it's why we're in the position that we're in. But I'm talking here not about human diversity, which is probably even more important, but I'm talking about molecular diversity. When we do any kind of synthesis, we take petroleum out of the ground, we do some single functionalization at some port, near there where we're getting the oil, and then we unleash organic chemistry to make highly functionalized molecules. Well, truth be told, the petroleum 100 million years ago were those highly functionalized molecules. So what we really do is we take a plant, we bury it in the ground for 100,000 years, we rip off all the functional groups, we take it out of the ground, we put them back on. People have been trying forever to sidestep this 100,000 years of fossilization, 100 million years of fossilization. Even Thomas Edison talked about this. Why is it so hard? Well, the reason it's hard is while it's easy to synthesize, I say it's easy, it's not easy, but it's possible to make things bio-based. The difficulty is to purify it at scale. And so that's where we've got to start thinking different. Everyone wants to have, look at how we make things. We 50, 60 years ago, when we designed our manufacturing processes, we specified things because it was easy to purify the oil products. We could get 99.999% pure material. And so we designed our products to be dependent on that purity. But that locked us into a narrow set of operating conditions. So when we want now bio-based replacement, we say, oh, but it has to be 99.99% pure. But does it? Does it really? Nature doesn't use high pure material. Nature uses Gaussian distributions of diversity of molecular structure. It embraces this molecular diversity. If you think of something like a reindeer, there it's hard, it's a high temperature, body temperature, the fluidity of its cells is a certain fluidity, but down in the cold, same kind of cells have the same kind of fluidity. If we humans try to design this, we'd make all these gradation of molecules, but the way nature works, it's a distribution of materials of different isomers of different molecular weights, and at high temperature, one group kicks in, and then at the low temperature, another group kicks in, and nature adapts through molecular diversity. So if we can accept how materials naturally form in nature, lignin and cellulose like to be together, maybe we should be inventing materials instead of paying money to separate them. Maybe we should keep them together. When we recycle materials, we find that certain materials like to come together. Maybe we should be designing materials to embrace those affinities for one another. And if we can do that, and we can do it reproducibly at commercial scale, now all of a sudden we can start pulling some things off. The manufacturing cost becomes pretty effective, and you've got a higher value material to boot. So an illustrative example I have for this is Parley Ocean Plastics and Adidas. Was blessed to have the opportunity to work with them back in 2015. I found myself on the center stage, the United Nations General Assembly, talking about whale wars, and Parley confiscated a bunch of this ocean debris, and we had to find a way to separate the nylon from the polypropylene, pull out the pigments, extrude it to a specific dimension. We actually built the first extruder to make this happen, and standing beside me on the board of directors of Adidas, we introduced the 2016 running shoe made out of ocean plastics. The point here is, if someone said, okay, take this and make it indistinguishable from virgin high purity material, that's never going to pencil out. You're always going to be better off just getting the high purity virgin material. And my nature would never do that. So we need to really rethink this whole process. So I hope this is useful to think of these different mechanisms in nature that we might be able to do. So I'll leave you with, over the last decade at the Warner Babcock Institute, we've filed, like I said, about 280 patents. We've got healthcare technologies, biomimicry technologies, circular economy technologies, reduced toxicity technologies, reduced carbon technologies, water technologies, using this mindset. This isn't just a hypothetical gee whiz. This is something that really does work. And I feel that we need to, as a society, embrace this just a little bit more if we're going to do this. And it's going to require collaboration. We need to, everyone in the chemical enterprises, everyone in the non-chemical enterprises need to look at how we do, how we teach, how we invent, and how we manage chemistry, and find a way for us all to work together. And I couldn't be more optimistic. I just look around at the people that are on this webinar, the people that I meet every day. We're going to do this. We just got to figure out how to do it efficiently and do it sooner than it's going to take. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you're all well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was fabulous. I'm going to share my screen here again. And thank you so much for sharing your vision. We're so happy to answer any questions that have come in. I know that if you have any additional questions, please type them into the control panel right in that chat question box. I know that Natalie and Janie have been working hard to pull them together. So I'm going to ask Natalie O'Neill, our higher ed program manager, to help read some of the questions. So we'll stay on as I guess and answer some of these questions.
Great, thanks Amy and John. There have been lots of questions coming in and lots of great congratulations in terms of a great presentation. Everyone is really enjoying it overall. So the first question that we do have coming in is, so you covered a lot of things here, John, but what is it that we could really focus on to make the biggest impact? Is it plastics? Is it solvent? Is there one thing that you could tell us to focus on?
That's a great question. It's funny, I get asked this question a lot. And my first reaction is, I could never be so presumptuous to say this is more important than this or that is, everyone has a different take. But I actually do think there is one thing that is more important than anything else, and that's education. That at the end of the day, if we see that we're not really training our chemists and chemical engineers and giving them the tools to do what we're talking about here. The way we teach chemistry and chemical engineering is kind of the same as it has been for the last several decades. And so you've got an organization like Beyond Benign that is promoting education in green chemistry throughout K through 12 and through higher ed. And arguably that's the most important thing we can do, because if you give the chemists and the chemical engineers and the designers of products the tools that they need, everything they do will get better. And so if we focus on the individuals, not focus on the stuff, not focus on them, just look at the people, look at the skills of the people. Not only are we supporting an economy and allowing people to find good jobs, to do things that are important and necessary, but I believe that people will do the right thing given the right tools. So the first job all of us have, in my opinion, is to focus on education and trust people to do the right thing given the skills that they need.
We appreciate that response, John.
Great. So the next question is, if I'm not a chemist, how do I play a role in all of the things that you've talked about? So if education is important, you're talking about green chemistry education, but I'm not a chemist, how do I get involved here?
Oh, thank you. That's a really good point. It's funny, if I go to some party or a group of people that are hanging out and someone says to me, what do I do? Oh my God, when I say I'm a chemist, it's like a conversation stopper. They look at their shoes, they say, oh, I hated chemistry in high school. We have developed this bad relationship between society and the field of chemistry. And think of the implications of that. The politicians we vote for, the products that we buy, the news that we listen to, saying, oh, I have nothing to do with the chemical enterprises. We abdicate a certain connectivity to the reality of our existence. And so we don't have to be a to appreciate Bach or to appreciate Beethoven. You don't need to know how to play the violin. To appreciate someone playing basketball and doing a cool move in basketball, you don't have to know how to play basketball to appreciate the artistry and the skill. When it comes to chemistry, it's kind of the same thing. We all are either going to benefit from the cool things that chemistry can do, or we're going to suffer from the negative things that chemistry can do. And to say, well, that's just not what I do, is probably a mistake. And so looking at how are we educating the next generation of students? How are we communicating what it is that we want, need, and desire? How are consumers interacting with retailers, interacting with NGOs? This is something that is a participatory requirement of people in society. If you sit on the sidelines and don't become engaged in the conversation at some level, then you deserve what you get at some level. We need to help each other. We need to be part of this. And if chemists keep doing what chemists have always done in isolation, well, they're going to keep doing what they've been doing in isolation. We need to break these barriers down and recognize that it's kind of pretty cool.
Very cool. So I feel like that comes into the next question that came in about what can we do to reduce toxics in the environment?
Well, the first thing is to develop an awareness of what is in your products. And there are a lot of organizations that will give you information of, if you right now we don't often do this, but in a hypothetical world where you're standing in a grocery store, you're standing in a store looking at a shelf of all different products, recognize that as your hand reaches and you grab one kind of shampoo instead of another kind of shampoo, you are making a decision at that moment to support either something that is good for human health and the environment or is less good for human health and environment. But if you don't participate in that process, if you don't think about that and figure that and find some ways of doing that, then that's not cool. And so I don't want to endorse any specific mechanism to communicate with society, but there are websites, there are many different programs. So that the thing is to take it upon yourself to learn how to access this information and to figure out which ones are the ones that are appropriate and trustworthy, and make some decisions based on that you're purchasing on this information.
Great. I think that's great advice for people.
Sorry, that thought I just want to finish. If you're buying, your preferences in purchasing will change the preferences in manufacturing, which will change the preferences in research and development. One of the in my opinion, sometimes we overuse this concept of voice of customer, that organizations won't do something because they say, well, we don't hear the voice of customer. And I like to use, I'm a big Disney fan, and so I use the Disney analogy of the Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid doesn't have a voice. Prince Eric wants her to say, I love you. She's not saying I love you. She clearly loves him, but she can't articulate it. And because she can't articulate it, the idiot doesn't know that she loves him. This is the way it has to be with society, that we need to articulate to industry what we want, because we have a hard time. Okay, if there's no voice of customer, we shouldn't do it. Well, let's create that voice. Let's make it loud, make it very, very loud.
So on that kind of front, in terms of industries, have you been able to identify pairs of industries that would be particularly potential chemically symbiotic?
I gotta tell. So one day, there's a great magazine article did a story on one day. I'm wearing a hard hat. I've got gloves and boots, holding a shovel, and I'm digging in asphalt. I'm in a steaming pile of asphalt, and with my gloves, I'm crumbling the asphalt, looking how it breaks. And as I'm doing this, my cell phone rings. And it's clinicians in Finland that are doing a cognition study of an Alzheimer's drug we're working on. They're talking about the cognition results. Now, most people would look at that and say, wait a minute, asphalt pavement, neurobiology, that doesn't seem to go together. But my model of Alzheimer's is an organic polymer wrapped around an inorganic particle. Got a small molecule that slips into the interface to control how it aggregates. What is asphalt? An organic polymer wrapped around an inorganic particle. We have a small molecule that slips into the interface to control how it aggregates. At the molecular level, they're kind of the same thing. A molecule doesn't know what industry it belongs to. A molecule is just a molecule. And so when you say what two things are related, to my way of thinking, the harder question is what two things aren't related. That we have this myopic view because our education system puts us in all these little boxes. I'm a chemist, I'm a biologist. Oh, I'm not a chemist, I'm an organic chemist. Oh, I'm not an organic chemist, I'm a synthetic organic chemist. Oh, I'm not a synthetic, I'm a heterocyclic synthetic. Okay. We spend all this time looking at how to categorize and subdivide and put each other in little teeny boxes that we forget nature doesn't do this. And that if we can realize that it is an illusion, these separations, and that the pharmaceutical industry, the cosmetics industry, the petroleum industry, NGOs promoting, worker health and safety, there's more in common than we're finding. And we need to, instead of looking at how we're different, start identifying how we're the same. And if you imagine this fractal view as we get closer and closer and closer to our products, once you get down to the carbon atoms, the nitrogen atoms, and the oxygen atoms, everything starts to look the same.
Great. So I think maybe we have time for one more question. And this one is about our current situation and what we're going to come out of COVID-19. Is there a way that we could really start kicking off this global economy? How can we make sure that we stop negative chemistry being used as an excuse to rebuild the global economy?
Hey, that's a great question. And I want to start by saying that there is an assumption that there's some epic battle of good and evil going on, that industry has these solutions and are choosing not to use them. And while there are some cases where this may be so, the vast majority, we don't have the solutions invented yet. Here we are, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. If we all woke up this morning and every consumer said, I am only going to buy safe, non-toxic, sustainable technologies. If every retailer said, we will only sell safe, non-toxic technologies. If every manufacturer said, we will only make safe, non-toxic, we can't do it. We haven't invented them yet. I would argue that 65% or more of the technologies do not have viable alternatives invented yet. So a sustainable future is not just a demand issue, it's a supply issue. And while so as we do behavioral changes to get people to demand these things, we also need the technologies to meet these demands. And so that's why education is so critical for K through 12 and university is, and I kind of, again, the silver lining here is that I know, the age that I am and the demographics that I represent, a lot of people that I've interacted with never would do Skype, never would do Zoom, would never do these video things. I'm a face-to-face kind of person. And all of a sudden they're realizing, hey, this isn't as bad as I thought. And maybe one thing that's going to come out of this is some of these conferences where hundreds of thousands of people get on airplanes to fly to some little city, and all the amazing impact that has on the environment and on global climate and things like that. Maybe people start rethinking this better. And once they realize they can communicate better, maybe research collaborations will be even more facile. And that instead of a group in Australia competing with a group in England who's competing with a group, and everyone wants to get fast at this and keep secret of this, keep secret of this, maybe recognizing the centrality of these issues, maybe through various media sources, we can lower these competitive things, which sometimes they're healthy, but most of the time these kinds of competitions are very unhealthy and useless. And so maybe seeing just how vulnerable we are as a species, and how every one of us humans is being affected and responding to this COVID-19 in very similar ways. And maybe there's this hope that this gives us all a reason to take a step and pause and stop looking at our differences and look at our similarities and be better at collaborating and doing science. It's a hope, and I believe it.
Absolutely. Natalie, was that it for now? I know we're running way over our allotted time here, but that's...
We are running way over our time, and we have a ton more questions, so we may have to expand our kind of green chemistry connection series here and get you guys back on the line so you can answer more questions, because we have a ton of audience members that have more questions that would love to be answered.
That would be a great thing to do, is to schedule another time and just have a conversation answering different questions. I'd be happy to do that anytime you'd like.
Great. All right, we're definitely going to be doing a lot more of these because we see these as great touch points to bring people together. So we'll be happy to get that out. If you registered for this webinar and attended, you'll receive the information about that as well. So so in closing, yes, our recording and supporting documents, you saw the note in the chat box there too. You can see a direct link where the recording will be posted along with supporting documents. Please join us next time. Next week, actually, we have a higher ed webinar, which we're going to be talking with Dr. Edagandra Panaswamy from Millipore Sigma and our very own Irv Levy on a DOZN 2.0 tool. Millipore's its open access tool for evaluating greener labs. And so we're talking about that, and there's also a tool to use in academic setting, virtual academic setting. We can give you a direct link there in the chat box. They might have already done that as well. I also just wanted to point you to, from our homepage, you can also directly access a curated list from Janie and Natalie, who are our moderators today, a curated list of virtual green chemistry resources that can be useful for both K through 12 and higher ed during this time, during this unprecedented time when we all have to think about ways of learning and teaching online and virtually. So in closing, a huge thank you to John. Thank you so much for sharing your vision with us and all of your passion and dedication to this space. And thank you to all of you who joined in or tuned in from this for this webinar from all over the world. So thank you so much for being part of this community, and be well, and happy Earth Day. Looking forward to next time.